I really wanted to talk about the experience of isolating. And as I've talked about it, I know this topic can be controversial in terms of how much aloneness is too much. I think for many of us, there is an art to our isolation. And this can be true for autistic people, traumatized people, often both, because it doesn't seem possible to find an autistic person without trauma. But I wanted to just share 10 top reasons why autistic people isolate and maybe offer a different lens to look at yourself from and trying to understand where you struggle and also where you thrive. Now, I looked at some articles on autism and loneliness, and certainly autistic people can be more inclined to describe loneliness and say, yes, I do feel that way. And yet there can be this push-pull in this enjoyment of being alone. And so I'm not going to cover just the loneliness piece, but I do want to let you know that I pulled parts of those research articles for this video. Couple things. The need to socialize can actually be traumatic for autistic people if it's placed on them from this layer of this is what you should be doing. Because for many of them, for the reasons I'm going to talk about, socializing can be quite challenging and or traumatic and or part of why, they feel bad even though they don't necessarily want to socialize. They should be, right? The idea of shoulding ourselves can be huge no matter what our brains look like. But it talks about that being problematic. And, things from peer victimization, bullying, sensory issues, all of it we're going to talk about. So let's get into it. Number one, the first reason why is that oftentimes we have underlying and or not underlying, but realistically big, challenging mental health issues that may be, underlying, meaning they might be misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed. If you're high masking and you've had a lot of trauma, perhaps you might have this overlayer between trauma and autism, but not know about the high masking piece. So things like anxiety, social anxiety, depression, OCD, all of those things can be significant. And interestingly, one of the articles talked about the role of hypervigilance. I talk so much about hypervigilance being the big overlap between autism and trauma for similar and different reasons. And that because we can be hypervigilant to social threat, to all the things I'm going to talk about, the environment, sensory issues, all of that, that can result in us camouflaging more and masking more and trying to manage that, to bury and hide the chaos we're feeling, the stress we're feeling. And that's number two, that camouflaging in and of itself, which can be necessary and needed, it can also create a situation where there's an exhaustion and fatigue from that, which is quite significant. It's quite depleting to be another version of yourself in every social interaction, also when your brain is taking in all the data all of the time. As I've talked about, hovering over yourself before, during, and after these events. And that this idea that, like I just said earlier, one of the research articles says that trying to fit in can actually, for autistic people, create more loneliness because of that masking or camouflaging, because of the experience and all of that. Remember, masking is a part of camouflaging. Number three is sensory issues. This is the idea that when you're doing these social things, you hear that little sound of the noisemaker in the background or the TV on low hum, and you can smell the food that was cooked in the house you're in and 3 houses down the block. Someone is, there's your clothes. You're wearing some camouflaging clothes and the tag is bothering you or the whole thing is bothering you. The skinny jeans you told yourself you could handle, you can't handle, whatever that is. And never wearing those again, by the way. And so all of that can really create, just like in the moment, a lot of reason to not want to put yourself in the way of being around other people. Or the people that you are around making you crazy, even your own family. It's common to have other autistic people with their own separate, little responses to sensory issues, and you can all be triggering each other and not necessarily be able to escape it or even necessarily recognize it. But at the core, sensory sensitivity can be a massive problem. Number four, it talked about this because we've had often these experiences from social anxiety, which is very common, to what's happening, we can get stuck in a negative feedback loop. And I was thinking about pattern recognition being so strong among autistic people, which I think is a superpower But I think if the pattern is like this loop of this always goes bad, I know it's going to go bad, and going back to hypervigilance, it talked about us getting caught in a sort of not meaning to, but often setting ourselves up to repeat the loop. And why would you want to do that? If 9 times out of 10, it's not an enjoyable experience, then you're going to be more likely to assume it will be negative again. But that can prevent us from maybe trying new things or, going alone the first time, things like that. Number 5, of course, a lack of understanding or even enjoying social cues, social communication challenges, oversharing, undersharing, being guarded, coming across as, too confident, arrogant, being quiet, not engaging, all of that, and even including like your empathy, if you have a hyperempathy response, like that being very draining. But at the core, we can find ourselves like not really knowing what to do or say, and or we're doing what the script says, but it's not us being our authentic selves, and it is work and depleting and exhausting and fatiguing. Number 6, we can have a preference for routine and structure. So we like things to be a certain way. We have safety when we can predict those things. And so going into new environments, especially socializing, everything from the restaurant layout to the menu to where you volunteer to the classrooms, right? All of that can take a while to accommodate to, even if you're going frequently, but certainly in new situations be even more difficult. The next thing is we might want to isolate because we like to pursue our hobbies and interests. We want to learn, we want to watch things, we want to listen to things, we want to just sit in our own silence or binge watch. This can be a really common and something we really enjoy, and it can be really good for us. And so it's not necessarily that we don't want to, but these other things are pulling us in, and frankly, often more enjoyable to our nervous systems and just to our brains and sense of self. So certainly the pursuit of those things. Number 8, kind of goes with all of this, which is just like this idea of the peace of being away from the triggers, the trauma. We might pursue the art of isolation, aka often called bed rotting, girl rotting, which I know many of you don't love, because when it's in the trauma stage of someone in their bed too long, or just the word I know is triggering, but for example, as I've talked about on TikTok, there are really beautiful videos of people spreading out, blankets and making a weekend of really isolating to take care of themselves. So obviously, if this is holding you back from friendships or making connections, or your depression is getting worse, which it very much can, we want to look at that. But I'm talking about it more from a choosing place where it feels peaceful. And I think giving ourselves permission to heal our nervous systems. Yeah, maybe we're not fully healed and people are triggering, but if you're autistic, people are always going to be triggering. If you ask me, that's just my opinion. Doesn't mean you want to not do things. It just means that sometimes you might choose that piece and want to choose that piece, and you should be able to, at least to me. Number 9 is a lack of safe environments for autistic people. And it talked about the way the rooms are set up or the expectations, the way things are run, the structure or not, all of that. The sensory issues could be potentially designed for autistic people in mind, but we know that that's not the case. And so as a result, it can reinforce trauma, it can reinforce bullying or rejection, or just be flooding and not be pleasurable. So that's important. Ideally, we'd want to work on creating those environments. And lastly, of course, bullying and being rejected in the past, just being on the receiving end of other people's negative perceptions of you, and that being its own self-reinforcing loop. And so it talked about things, though, for example, that looking at some research reported that factors such as sharing interests and a sense of safety, recognition, and acceptance would help make, for example, an environment better for us, more conducive to those dynamics. It also talked about that autistic people often enjoy, no surprise, other autistic people more. Not necessarily over others, but it's just easier to communicate with someone who kind of speaks in your vibe or language. That doesn't mean we shouldn't make friends who aren't autistic or whatever, but that can interfere. And the way that we even perceive loneliness. It talked about a research study that was looking at a loneliness scale for typically neurotypical people. And it said that having no one to talk to and doing things alone was a sign of loneliness. Well, I would venture to say that for many autistic people, doing things alone and having no one to talk to might be the art of isolation and a choice you are making. And so even how we might assess those things, especially among, a lot of what I'm talking about to you here, often late diagnosed or undiagnosed, high masking individuals who have thought everything they struggled with was trauma. And we know that trauma can also create a lot of these things. But trauma doesn't usually create a thing where you want to be alone and pursue hobbies because it fuels your brain, right? These are the nuances we can find. Or that every sensory issue that you have, which we all have different ones, usually the sensory issues around trauma relate to the trauma, not the massive one, right? Of course, things like your startle response can be similar in both, but we're talking about how all of those things kind of combine. And so I think it's interesting to think about, what do you need? When is choosing isolation a good thing? Remember, like I said earlier, if you're struggling with depression, too much alone time and lack of human connection and all of that can clearly make our symptoms worse. And so it is about evaluating, how much am I doing this? Where is it serving me? Where is it not? But a lot of what I want to share here is like to stop beating ourselves up for enjoying our alone time. That, we all have our own tolerance for it, but to stop shooting ourselves and shaming ourselves because maybe our brains don't need the same level of socialization as everyone else. And that is perfectly fine. So I'm curious if you think I forgot something, what your thoughts are, and how you might perceive the difference between isolating in a sort of artful way versus a harmful way. I'm not sure. I'm curious what you think. So thank you so much for being here. Please do not forget to follow me on Substack. I just posted a new newsletter a couple days ago, really about the super trauma video I just made and about the Honora film and a few other things. And as I said, my phone was stolen in the hospital with my son, and I cannot download TikTok on my new phone. So the only way to get there is through my laptop, which I have to record videos in a different way. I really like recording the TikTok app. But like I said, now you can post 3-minute videos on Instagram and on YouTube Shorts. So I'll be reposting some things there and then posting some new things on those platforms as well. But I really have to say Substack is such a beautiful way to connect. It's often through writing and videos and audio. I might start a podcast through there. I'm not sure yet. I also want to start some interviews in this next year. So I hope I can do that and share it with you as well. So thanks for being here. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.